Have you ever felt like you're just a sponge, kind of passively soaking up whatever the media throws your way? I think we've all been there. But what if I told you there was this huge intellectual rebellion that completely flipped that idea on its head? Today, we're going to get into the story of how a group of thinkers totally changed the game, transforming us from passive sponges into active players. So let's start with this big question. Does the media literally inject ideas right into your brain? For a long, long time, the answer from the experts was a resounding yes. The thinking was, you watch the news, you see a movie, and that message gets mainlined straight into your consciousness, no questions asked. But a rebellion was brewing. You can really see the two sides of the fight right here. On one side, you've got the old guard with their hypodermic needle theory. It's exactly what it sounds like, a simple one-way street. The media injects a message, and the passive audience just takes it. But the new view, totally different. It saw media as a complex conversation, a negotiation where we, the audience, are just as important as the people making the shows. So let's start by digging into the old regime they were fighting against. Okay, so to really get how revolutionary this was, you first have to understand the old way of thinking. Before the 1960s, there was this one really specific idea that dominated the whole field. It was called mass communications research. This model, which really took off in America, pretty much treated media like a science experiment. Stimulus and response. Researchers would use tons of surveys and just crunch the numbers to measure the media's effects. And they were often focused on the bad stuff, like, is TV making people more violent? It was a very direct, numbers-driven way to look at something that's actually super human and complex. And it all boiled down to just a few key assumptions. The old guard saw audiences as this passive, faceless mass. They were absolutely convinced that the media had a direct, almost behavioral influence. And they thought the message was simple. What you see is what you get, no hidden meanings. This whole way of thinking led them to ask one, and really only one question. What is the media doing to people? But then, everything started to change. A group of thinkers over in Britain, led by the legendary Stuart Hall at the Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies, or CCCS, they showed up and basically said, hold on, you're missing the entire point. And they kicked off a radical break from that old way of thinking. So the very first pillar of the old theory that they decided to tear down was this idea of direct behavioral influence. They argued that the media's real power wasn't just about making you do things, it was about shaping how you see things. It was ideological. Meaning the media gives us the frameworks for understanding the world, the very lens we look through. It defines how we see our relationships, our politics, and it does it so subtly we don't even notice. Next up, they took aim at this idea that a media message is just a simple, clear window looking out onto the world. The CCGS said, look, a news report, a sitcom, whatever it is, it's not a transparent window. Instead, they called them coded texts. They're carefully constructed messages, packed with hidden assumptions and values. So they aren't perfect reflections of reality, they're very carefully crafted representations of it. And this leads to maybe the most powerful idea of them all. And it's all about you, the person watching this right now. The CCS completely threw out the idea of a passive audience. Instead, they proposed something new, the active viewer, the active reader. We don't just absorb messages like sponges, we interpret them. We bring our own life experiences, our own beliefs to the table, and we actively decode everything we see. So with those three massive breaks from the past, Stuart Hall and his colleagues basically created a whole new toolkit for understanding the world around us. They were rethinking everything, the media's role, what its messages really are, and most importantly, our role as the audience. And Stuart Hall himself just summed it up perfectly. He said, the media isn't just some messenger. It's in a dominant position, actively defining the terms of our social and political lives. In other words, it sets the whole agenda. This all comes together beautifully in their most famous idea, the encoding and decoding model. It's a pretty simple three-step journey. First, producers encode a message with a preferred meaning, the meaning they want you to get. Second, that message, the text, gets broadcast. Finally, we, the audience, decode it. And here is the absolute game changer. Because we're all different, with different lives, our decoded meaning might be completely different from what the producer intended. Meaning is never a sure thing. Now, this wasn't just a bunch of academics sitting around thinking big thoughts, not at all. the CCSS rolled up its sleeves and put these ideas to work, analyzing everything from newspapers to TV to see how this whole meaning-making thing actually happened in the real world. And wow, did they cover a lot of ground. They dug into decades of old newspapers. They deconstructed women's magazines to see how ideas of femininity were being built page by page. They moved on to TV news, but they looked way beyond just simple bias to find the deeper, unstated assumptions, what they called inferential structures that really shaped the news. They even dove into popular TV crime dramas and everyday current affairs shows. And what's so important is that eventually they moved away from only looking at big headline news and high politics. They realized that some of the most powerful ideological work happens in stuff we might just brush off as simple entertainment, sitcoms, quiz shows, even sports. They wanted to understand how these programs shape our popular common sense, our basic everyday assumptions about how the world works. So why does this 50-year-old academic rebellion still matter so much? Because these ideas give us the tools we desperately need to navigate our own insanely complex media world, a world of filter bubbles, disinformation, and just endless scrolling. So what's the big takeaway for you? Well, think of this as your personal toolkit for today's world. First, remember, media is never, ever neutral. Second, you are not a passive consumer. You're an active decoder of messages. Third, meaning is a battlefield. And finally, the most powerful thing you can do is question everything. The next time you're watching or reading something, just ask yourself, what's the preferred meaning being pushed here? And do I buy it? In the end, what Stuart Hall and his colleagues did wasn't just write a new chapter in media theory. They actually wrote us, the audience, into the story as powerful characters. So the final question isn't, what does the media do to you anymore? It's, what do you do with the media? How are you going to decode the world around you?